One town hall meeting. Very excited that Dr. Adu is presenting tonight on Action Research Dissertation, which I think is a topic that's of interest to a lot of our students and very relevant to our program. And if you haven't taken a class with Dr. Adu, I'm sure you'll take one with him in the very near future. He's been a really integral part of our program and very grateful for all his support and guidance throughout the last 2 years that I've worked at the Chicago School. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to him at this time. And thank you again for presenting, Dr. Adu.
Thank you, Dr. Torres. And thank you for the introduction. So I will just go ahead and give you, just trying to give you a basic information about how action research dissertation should look like. And I'm not sure whether you also can hear noise at the background. They are my children. So you'll be hearing a few things at the background. So and I'm sorry about the noise, but I'm hoping that we'll be able to have a great discussion today. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to talk about action research, and those of you who have already taken a course in action research, this is just a big picture of what action research is all about, right? So there are three main processes, and your study, you can choose from any one of them. The first one is the proactive process. So this means that you as a researcher and also a practitioner, you are seeking for a problem, right? So you think about what you are doing in your workplace and trying to identify a specific problem that you can solve. You are being proactive. Reactive means that you wait for the problem to happen, or you encounter a problem and then you try to solve or understand the problem. You are reacting to the problem. And the last one is the innovative process. It's quite related to the proactive, but this one, you just want to try to create a problem. You don't want to cause a problem, but you just create a problem. And one example is that maybe you have identified as a solution that you can do research to address. Maybe there's a technology that is new technology that you want to use. You just ask yourself, what problem can this technology be used to address, right? So you are trying to, based on the new technology, trying to create a problem or trying to search for a problem that the new technology can address, right? So you are being, innovative in this process. So after you have identified a problem, you think about, okay, what is the purpose of my study, right? And you have to make sure that there is a consistency between the problem that you want to address and what you want to do in the study. You can examine the features of the problem. You can involve participants in generating solutions to the problem. You can assess the efficacy of an existing solution or a potential solution, and lastly you can do research just to understand the problem, right? So, and then you collect data, right? And then you analyze and you get your findings, and then you develop an action plan, right? So what makes this process an action research is the identification of a practical problem, and then researching, and after that taking action to address the problem. So that's all about an action research. And during my presentation, you can stop me and ask me questions. I'll be happy to address, or you can type in your questions, and Dr. Torres will be able to read the questions to me for me to address. So what is the difference between action research and a traditional research? So in terms of action research, there are three main characteristics that you will have to look at. The first one is the practical problem, right? So it's action research because you have identified, you have experience, or directly or indirectly experience a problem, a practical problem that you want to address. In traditional research, you look into the literature, try to identify a gap in the literature and do research, right? So your ultimate goal for action research is to address the practical problem that you have experienced and to improve the profession. And the ultimate goal for traditional research is to fill the gap that you have identified, right? So, in terms of involvement, because you have identified a problem that is experienced by people you interact with, when you are trying to solve the problem, you directly involve them. So, when it comes to action research, there is more likely that you would directly involve participants during the process, not only the data collection process, but maybe understanding of the problem or implementation of the solution, which is very different from traditional research, where you actively involve participants at the data collection stage, right? Most of the time. So these are the differences between action research and traditional research. So in doing your dissertation, it's it's quite similar to the traditional dissertation, right? Because you have your introduction, you have your literature review, you have the methodology, you have the findings, and then you have to do a discussion, right? But for this presentation, I will try as much as possible to identify or talk about the things that you might be a little bit different from the traditional dissertation. So this one is just a big picture, and I always tell students that when you are working on your dissertation or working on your dissertation document, you always have to think about your audience, who are going to read your dissertation document, right? You are not writing it for yourself, you are writing for somebody to read. So this means that you always have to have your audience in mind. So for the introduction, you are just telling your audience, this is all what my study is all about, right? So you talk about what your problem is, who is affected by the problem, why is it important to address the problem, how do you plan to address the problem, right? That's what the introduction is. You are introducing the problem and how you're going to solve the problem to your audience, right? In terms of the literature review, it's a little bit different from the traditional one. The traditional one is more of identifying studies that has been done and trying to connect the phenomenon that you are studying to the studies and trying to emphasize on the gap and then you saying that, okay, this is the gap in the study, so I'm going to do my research to address this gap. This one is more of a practical problem that you want to address. So you have to connect it to studies that has been done concerning your problem or the solution that you want to implement, or any theories that inform your problem or inform the solution that you want to implement, right? Any best practices. So um, you have some kind of liberty to talk about best practices, theories that informs all the problem. So you are trying to connect existing literature to the problem or the solution that you want to implement. Methodology is just the same thing as the traditional one, right? What exactly you're going to do, right? You're going to tell your audience what method you're going to use, how you're going to collect your data, how you're going to analyze your data, who is going to be your participant, how many participants are you going to focus on, how you're going to analyze your data. So it's going to be the same thing. For findings, it's the same, right? You describe participant characteristics and how you're going to how you analyze your data and what are the findings, and then how does the findings or how do the findings address your research question. The last one will be the implication and interpretation, right? And the action research is going to be very different when it comes to implication, because this is where you talk about your action plan. What lesson have you learned from the findings, and what are you going to do with the findings, right? Utilization is very important. So this is the big picture. This is what your audience expect you to do, right? That's what they want to learn from you for your study. So for concerning chapter one, I'm going to touch on all these. And as I said, if you have any question, Maybe let me stop here and ask whether you have a question for me. Do you have any question? Okay, so if not, we can go ahead. So for chapter one, it's quite similar to the traditional one, but for the background, you have to emphasize on the practical problem, right? And also the content, and I'm going to talk about it. So these are the sections that I'm going to touch on for today. So what you're going to do in for the background of the problem section is to tell your audience the problem, right? So what is the practical problem that you have experienced? What is the context of the problem? What are the circumstances that the problem is happening, right? um, who are directly and indirectly affected by the problem, right? What is the current what is being done to address the problem currently, right? And then you talk about the essence of your focus. So you can say that okay, the focus for this study, I'm going to focus on this aspect of the problem. I'm going to also focus on maybe the solution, and this is a rationale. This is the reason why I'm focusing on the solution, right? So I always tell students if you have not totally understood the problem, don't focus on the solution, right? You first have to understand the problem. So, after, when you're talking about the problem you have experienced and you want to do a research on that, ask yourself, have you totally understood the problem? If you have totally understood the problem, you know the cause of the problem, you know who are directly affected, then for the research, you can focus on potential solutions, right? But if you haven't, you don't know the characteristics of the problem, you don't know the complexity of the problem, you don't know whether the stakeholders really understand what is really happening, there's a need for you to do research first to understand the problem. And maybe later you can do research to develop solution or implement some potential solutions. So after talking about the background of the problem, then you talk about your research problem. The research problem is quite similar to the problem that you have talked about, when you are discussing the background. But this one, you are being specific. You try to draw the boundaries. So the problem can be so big, right, that you don't have the time and the resources to do it. So you can say that in the context of this study, or for this study, I'm going to focus on maybe this aspect of the problem, right? Or I'm going to focus on this aspect of the solution. So the research problem is the problem that you're directly going to address in your study, right? So I'm giving some example, maybe lack of understanding of the existing problem, right? Or there's no effective solution. So you want to address that, right? Maybe come up with a solution. Or there's a lack of assessment of an existing intervention. So this is where you try to narrow down your problem so that it could be researchable. Then after they talk about the purpose of the study, right? So the purpose, these are the things that you have to include, operative word, like the purpose of this study is to examine or to evaluate or to understand or is to assess what is going on. And then you state a specific focus, right? So maybe it's an understand this specific issue, lack of motivation in the classroom, um, and then you talk about the specific participants. Are they higher level, graduate student, undergraduate? Are they um, high school students? So who are your participants? Then you talk about the research approach. Are you going to use qualitative, quantitative, mixed method, or phenomenological approach, or other specific approach, and it's not required, but you can talk about you can briefly talk about the data collection strategy, whether you're going to do interview, focus groups, document analysis, and other strategies that you can use to collect rich data to address a research question. And then you can talk about, okay, so if you have your findings, how are you going to use your findings? What would the finding be used for? So, example, if you are focusing on understanding the problem, maybe the findings will be used to think about solution to the problem, right? So then the next one is your research question. There are two main type of research question. There are exploratory research question and confirmatory research question. Exploratory is more of a qualitative. Most of the time you start with what or how. Um, and then confirmation is where you can, it's close-ended question. Is you can say, is there an effect of this intervention on that, or is there an effect of this on that, or is there, um, you know, a question that is close-ended, your answer will be yes or no. Your answer will be yes or no. So that, and I have a PowerPoint that talks about types of research question. You can email me and I'll be able to send you that. Um, then you have to define the keywords. So defining the keywords are the main concept that you're going to use to discuss your problem, to discuss the method you're going to use, or to discuss the phenomenon that you are studying, right? Maybe the solution. And so you are moving from abstract concept to your practical ideas, right? So this means that you have to operationalize, in quantitative, you are operationalizing it. In qualitative, they say you are trying to um, describe, give specific attribute to a concept, right? Um, so you are assigning a specific attribute to abstract concept. Um, I've forgotten the term, I think it's empirical um, definition or empirical properties. So, what is the practical properties of the concept? And the reason why you have to do that is to narrow down the concept to and also to make sure that you and your audience, all the readers, are on the same page what the concept means, right? And to overcome any kind of ambiguity in terms of the concept. So that's the rationale behind defining concept. And then we have delimitation, and it can also be called scope. The scope is trying to draw the perimeter of the study. The reason why you have to draw the perimeter is that you have limited time and resource. You cannot focus on everything, right? So in terms of the population, what is your focus? Maybe for this study, I'll focus on only two classes. So maybe there are 10 classes that are involved that you can do research with, right? 10 classes, but maybe we say that for the purpose of this study, I'm going to only focus on maybe two classes or participant or student in this one class. Um, in terms of the method, you can be more specific. Instead of saying that you're going to focus on doing a qualitative, you can be more specific by saying that you're going to do maybe a phenomenological approach or case study or granite theory. For the location, you can describe the location but you have to be very careful if what you are studying is very sensitive. You have to try to protect participants by not being um, specific in terms of the location and specific participants, right? You don't have to mention the institution name. You don't have to mention the class that you're going to focus on, just to protect participants and maybe the institution. So the phenomenon in terms of the problem, you can say that okay, I'm going to focus this on like this aspect of the problem. So the limitation is trying to define the boundaries. What are the parameters of the study, right? And if you have my PowerPoint, when you click on this one, I have a short presentation on delimitation and limitations. Significance of the study, right? In terms of the benefit, who are going to directly benefit from the study? Right. What are the long-term benefits of your study? What are the short-term benefits? What contributing are you going to make to the profession? Because the essence of you doing the research, the ultimate goal is to improve the professional practice, right? So what kind of contribution is your research going to make? Then conceptual framework is all about identifying models, concepts, and theories that inform either your problem that you want to focus on or the solution that you want to come up with, right? So you look into this existing studies or existing best practices and identify concept models that you could adopt and use to better understand your problem, right? So sometimes you end up having more than one model. So you just have to assess the strength and the limitations of those models that are theories in helping you to understand the problem or develop a solution to the problem, right? And then you can synthesize, trying to bring them together and see how they can um, come together to explain um, your focus of the study. And I also have a presentation, a short presentation on that too. If you click on that, you can see a video on this too. So limitations. So the limitations is all about thinking about the actions that you're going to take in your study and decision that you're going to make. What are the negative implications? What are the weaknesses of that? One action that you're going to take, maybe you're going to do a qualitative study. What is the weaknesses of doing a qualitative study? Maybe you might not be able to generalize the findings because you are focusing on a small sample to do, right? So think about the actions that you're going to take in the study and then think about the limitation, the weaknesses, and then you describe those weaknesses. So I finished with chapter one. We go to chapter two. I'm going to talk about the essence of um, writing chapter two, right? There is ongoing big debate whether you have to do a literature review when you're doing an action research, right? Some those who support don't support the need for you to do a literature review have make an assertion that um, since the problem is so unique, um, there's no need for you to look around for what has been done. You just have to focus. It's a practical problem. You just want to collect your data and see the effectiveness of or addressing the problem. You don't need a literature to review the literature to address to help you to conduct your research, right? Like a traditional study where you have to learn what has been done, and based on that you identify a gap and then you conduct research. Those who support literature review for action research, they say that we have to document um, the actions that you take in your professional practice so that other people can learn and not repeat the same mistakes. So that's why um, when you do action research, you have to publish it so that people know the best practices, and then we learn from each other and we share ideas, and then we improve the practice. Without review literature, you'll not be able to know what has been done that will help you to improve upon maybe assessing or understanding the problem, or improve upon coming up with a solution. So for me, I support doing literature review, right? You will learn a lot from what has been done, especially best practices concerning the issue that you want to focus on. So these are the essence of doing. This is for you as a researcher. You will learn more about your problem when you read about the best practices, about the research that has been done. You will learn more about it, right? So let's say you are teaching a class and you feel like students are not being uh, they don't feel they don't enjoy the class. They don't actively engage. They are not actively engaged in the class, right? That's the problem. So you ask yourself, what should I do? You go back to the literature. What has been done? Maybe somebody did a similar research and understood why the student are not being engaged in doing the course activities, and then you learn from it, and you take some of the information and you be able to use it for your study. So it's very important you learn more about the problem when you read what has been done. You learn about the potential solution, best practices. It also helps you to justify the problem. So people are going to ask you, why do you think there's a need for you to address this problem? And then you can also use the resulting literature to help you to justify the action that you're going to take in your studies, right? Um, it helps you to connect your study to the existing literature. It also educates your readers about your study, right? About the problem that you want to address. So these are the essence. Um, so what do you have to include in the literature review? You have to tell your audience about where you got your information from, how you collected, how you selected the appropriate literature, and then and the next one is to synthesize, comparing and contrasting as you inform your audience about the problem or the solution, right? And I don't want to emphasize more on this one. We have NCAID has a free literature review course that you can take. So if you are interested in learning more about literature review, you can take a free course with us, and you'll be able to. You can take it anytime, right? You just have to email us, and I'll link you to the person responsible for that. So the next one is a methodology, right? This is quite similar to the traditional one. You talk about overview, right? Overview. You tell your audience, you remind them about the purpose of your study and the problem that you want to address, right? And then you tell them about, okay, what they should expect in this chapter. Then you go to the next one where you state your research questions and the rationale. Rationale is the justification. Why do you need to address these questions, right? People want to know based on what you have reviewed in the literature, why there's a need, or based on the problem that you have identified, why do you think we should address these questions? So that will be the rationale. Then you talk about your research design and the paradigm, and I'm going to emphasize on these two that because that is what is a little bit different from the traditional one. And then you talk about your roles, background, and biases. You talk about the population and sample procedure, quality assurance, and instrumentation, data processing, assumption, limitations, and ethical assurance. There's a link here that talks about all these things. What I'm going to emphasize on it today is the paradigm and also the research design. So you are expected to talk about your research design, the specific method or methodology you're going to use. Are you going to use descriptive qualitative design or qualitative approach? Quantitative approach, sorry. Are you going to use narrative approach? Are you going to use graded theory? Are you going to use phenomenological approach? Your audience, I always tell you to think about your audience when you're describing things, because we are telling them what exactly the actions you're going to take in your study and why you think it's important for you to take those actions. So you tell them that, oh, maybe you're going to use phenomenological approach. What it's all about? What is phenomenological approach? You define what it is, and then you talk about why you think this approach will be the best for you to collect rich data from participants to address your research question that you have, or address the problem that you want to um, work on. Right. Then you talk about a paradigm. Right. The paradigm is there is a how should I define it? It is a is a belief, practices, ideas that has been accepted by a particular research community, right? And there are different kinds of paradigm. These are the four main ones, right? There are a lot. These are the four main ones. We have transformative paradigm. Transformative paradigm is, as the name implies, you want to transform, you want to improve the lives of participant, right? If let's say they are in a very difficult situation, you're going to do research to improve their life, you are using maybe a transformative paradigm, right, to inform your research approach. You can also think about a pragmatic paradigm. Um, this is where you have a belief that you're going to use any methodology or anything that works, right? So based on the problem that you want to address, any you are open to any idea, you are open to any tool, you are open to any methodology that will help you to understand the problem. So you are pragmatic in your process. So most of the time when you are doing mixed method study or you are using mixed method approach, you can use the pragmatic paradigm, right? Because you are identifying methodology that works, that you think it will help you to um, collect rich data from participants to address your research question, right? And I think I have a short presentation on these paradigm, especially the qualitative one. Constructivism, right? You and participant, you are trying to construct knowledge. You are interacting with participant to construct knowledge. This one may be very useful if you are using participatory action research, right? Because you engage with participant in coming up with a solution, in constructing knowledge to help them to improve upon their lives. So, and we have, especially those who are using a quantitative study, can use a um, positivism. I hope I pronounce it right. For those who are using a quantitative approach. So just learn about all these and other paradigms and see which one will best inform your study, because it's very important for your audience to know the paradigm that you are using. And another one that is quite different from the traditional one is talking about your rules, your background, and biases. Because you experience the problem directly, right? You have some kind of connection with the problem, right? So this means that the way you look at a problem, the way you analyze the problem, the way you collect data to address the problem, the way you even ask participant question, um, it will be very different from somebody who haven't directly experienced a problem that you have experienced, right? So this means that you are coming in with some kind of biases or background information that might positively or negatively affect the result. And then this is where you want your readers to know who you are. It's very important. Letting them know who you are will better help them to understand your findings and also put in your findings some kind of context and also believe what you found, right? Because you are open to them, you are show them who you are. Not you shouldn't provide any information that has nothing to do with the topic, right? But provide information that you think will help your reader to better understand who you are in terms of addressing the problem or doing this research. In terms of your role, I think you have about three roles here, right? You are a researcher. You are trying to collect data. You are trying to address a problem that you have identified. You are a facilitator, because sometimes when you are implementing a problem, a solution, you are like an organizer. You are organizing the things, the projects, the activities and everything. So you are a facilitator at the same time, a practitioner too, right? You are a professional person. You're engaging and doing your work, your role as maybe an instructor or a role as an administrator. So you have about three roles at this, and doing this research at the same time. So you always have to let your audience know the roles that you are playing as a researcher, as a facilitator. Sometimes as a researcher, you can say that, okay, because I have the direct link to the problem, I'm not going to collect the data directly from participant. I will let a research assistant to help me to collect the data so that I will not overly influence participant because I work with them all the time, right? So in this case, you can be a facilitator and then maybe somebody collect data for you, right? So that you will not adversely affect the participant responses because they see you all the time, and that kind of power relations can be reduced a little bit. So this is where you communicate to your audience what your roles are in terms of in carrying out this research. You talk to them about your background that has some link to what you're studying, your beliefs. This is very important, especially those who want to implement a solution, because you are implementing a solution that you believe will work. So, because you believe it will work, your mind is you are looking for positive results. And because you are looking for a positive, there's more likely that there are some negative things that might happen that you may not pay attention because you were not looking for it. So that's why you have to be aware, as personally, be aware of what your biases and your beliefs as you are conducting this research because you are so much close to what you are researching, right? And then lastly, after knowing, reflecting on your role, reflecting on your background, you can you can try. It's not a perfect, but you try to be in a bias-free state. How can you do that? It's just like a meditation. I have a presentation um, on this. I think I presented on transcendental phenomenological approach, and one of the steps that you have to follow is to um, um, reflect on your biases and background and trying to meditate and trying to put them aside and have that kind of free your mind from all these background and biases and behave as if you have no prior knowledge about the issue and go and address the issue or research on the issue with clear mind, right? So you can engage in that kind of thing. It's just kind of it's quite similar to meditation, right? Reflecting on your background, reflecting on your bias, your role, and then you can even document that process, right? As you think about it, you document the process, and this one can be done several times. It can be done when you want to do conduct interview. It can be done when you are analyzing your data several times, so that you'll be able to set aside your personal professional biases and beliefs, and then so that you'll be able to come up with the result that will be trusted by your readers. And it's a process. It's not a perfect state. I always tell students you cannot reach a stage where you can say that, oh, I am very objective. I have no link to the what I'm studying. Right? There's gonna be a little bit of influence, but at least you are working very hard to put aside your background. The results are the same, right? To this traditional one, you overview certain, you talk about the demographics, data analysis process, your presentation of the main findings, and the presentation of other findings if needed, if you want to present those of them. Concerning chapter 5, the only difference is the implication, right? But you start with overview, summary of your result. Then you talk about the interpretation, right? What do you think? How do you make sense of the findings, and how are they connected to the literature? Then you talk about the implication, including the action plan and limitations and recommendation, right? So I'm going to talk about implications because that's the section that is going to be a little bit different. So based on the findings and implication interpretation of your findings, what is your take home message? What should we learn? What if a practitioner is reading your study? What lessons do you want them to draw from your data or your findings? Right. What about researchers? What about policymakers? What about administrators? Right. What about the stakeholders? What should they do? What should they do concerning the finding that you have? The next one that you have to talk about is how should they how are you going to use the findings? Right. What is your action plan? So you tell your audience or your readers how you're going to use the findings, and then you talk about, um, what action you're going to take, the action you're going to take um, to uh, address the problem that you have identified. So it's more for utilization of the findings, right? If somebody asks you, okay, so this is your interpretation of the result, and this is the result. What are you going to use? What are you going to do with this result, right? So that's all about your action plan. It shouldn't be a lot of information, but at the end of the day, people want to know specific action. So let's say now you conducted a research. Now you understand the problem based on the findings. What next? Right. So you can say that, okay, based on this problem, I think that the next step I'm going to take is to look into solutions that are consistent with this problem, that you know that it potentially can address this problem. Or, oh, there is a solution here that this researcher did that it could be used to address this problem, right? And this is what I'm going to do for the next steps, right? So it's a specific step that you're going to take, your plan based on the results. So that's what I have for you for today. Let me see the time. Oh, okay, 7:42 here. So do you have any question for me?
Lena had a comment. She said, wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Lena.
Yes, you always do. I love listening to you talk about this. It's just helpful to hear it again. And you always are such a great teacher. So thank you.
Thank you too.
Yes, and
And
nice. Thank you.
yes, yeah, thank you, Anaya. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so then I recorded this presentation, so I will be sending you the link, and
Yes.
maybe for those who didn't come. So
Yes, and I'll post it in our resource cafe with the other links. And thank you again, Dr. Du. I thought your presentation was very insightful. Even for our students who aren't planning to conduct action research dissertations, I think this information will be very helpful in just them conducting action research in their professions and their professional settings. So thank you very much.
you're welcome. And also thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to your students. Yeah.
Yes, I
Okay.
always love to have you present to our students whenever you're available. So I greatly appreciate it.
Okay.